Hello and welcome to the second video in a series on sea level rise, prepared to cover topics in bite-sized chunks to make this complex topic more accessible. I'm David Loya, the City of Arcata Community Development Director, and I'm leading the city's local coastal program update. And a key topic in coastal planning is sea level rise adaptation. I hope this video helps broaden your understanding, prepares you for participating in climate change planning discussions, and informs your decisions about the city's adaptation strategies. This video will continue our discussion about dikes, berms, and tidelands. In this video, I want to share with you how dikes and berms can be useful tools in adaptation and retreat. We'll cover some of the content from part one for context, but I'll be covering this in refresher mode. So feel free to watch part one for more in-depth discussion on the background. The dikes around Wiggy prevent tides from reaching their historic context. These dikes have been in place for more than 100 years. Again, the three landmarks that we use to orient on the aerial images are shown here. Highway 101, State Route 255, and the Butcher Slough mouth. This aerial shows the areas that would be subject to tidal flooding if the bay had 6 additional feet of elevation. So sea level rise goes on over time until we have 6 more feet of sea level. The gray background you see is a way of representing the topography. In the last videos, you saw a colorful spectrum showing a range of topographies. In this, the gray reflects supposed to reflect a 3-dimensional image of the ground. You can see the roads stand out and the hills and creeks stand out as well. The blue and pink overlay represents different tidal elevations. These areas would be part of the bay if there were no dikes preventing tidal flooding. Recall from our last video that the bay would extend inland today if the dikes and tide gates did not exist. There's Highway 101. State Route 255 and Smoke Boulevard. Summarizing the main points of part one and synthesizing this new information, the historic extent of the bay as mapped before any dikes existed maps onto the low-lying areas shown in green on the topography heat map. These same low-lying areas bordered by Smoke Boulevard and Old Arcata Road would be subject to tidal influence and flooding in the future with up to 6 feet of sea level rise. This scenario is depicted in this map would only happen if there were no dikes to manage flooding. We'll discuss the likelihood of this sea level rise scenario in a future video. For now, we'll stick to the berms and dikes coupled with tide gates and how they can help extend the useful life of existing homes, businesses, and public infrastructure in these areas that will be subject to increased flooding in the future. Let's take a closer look at existing dike structures. Here are your 3 landmarks to orient by. And 101 is the trail corridor, or the linear features along the eastern shoreline of Arcata Bay. This aerial shows dikes and dike-like features along with their elevations. Dike-like features include roads that could function the same as a dike, even though they were not originally designed as a dike. The colors show the elevation range that each feature is in. So the black features are all elevation 13.1 feet or higher. The dark blue features are between 11.6 and 12.6 feet in elevation, and the red features are the lowest elevation features, ranging between 2 feet and nearly 9 feet. We use this information to get a sense for where the gaps in the dike structures would be for a given elevation of tidal event. For instance, currently our highest tides of the year, or our king tides, get to an elevation of about 10 feet at their maximum. That would overtop dikes that are labeled violet, yellow, light yellow, and red in this image. In this area, not much is at risk of tidal flooding from even the highest tides we currently experience. This isn't to say that there are not flood events currently. When larger storm systems occur, stormwater backs up behind the tide gates on the landward side of the dikes, and we see periodic flooding. But we are not seeing sunny day flooding from tidal influence currently. The tides are not overtopping our dikes, leading to erosion and land and property damage currently. As we plan for the future, we need to keep these risks in mind. This is the oblique aerial from part 1 of the series. You can see the South G Street neighborhood in the midground. While this area doesn't have a lot of commercial and industrial businesses, there is also a large residential neighborhood. In addition, there are important water and wastewater infrastructure in this area. But you can see the majority of the former tidelands are undeveloped. In fact, most of this land is owned by public agencies and managed for natural resources. This difference in land use leads to different approaches to address sea level rise in these areas. This aerial is looking nearly due north at the South G Street neighborhood. Here are the 101, 255 Cloverleaf and Butcher Slough landmarks to help orient. People live and work in the G Street neighborhood. The wastewater treatment plant, the hundreds of jobs and thousands of visitors to the marsh every year are currently protected from tidal flooding because the area is filled. So the land is slightly higher than the nearby pasture lands, and the area is protected by existing dikes. This protection zone is already armored against flooding today, and our adaptation strategy needs to consider how to relocate all the families and workers in this area as tidal waters increase. So what does retreat look like in this area? There are hundreds of housing units that will lose by retreat. We need to build enough housing to rehouse those who would be displaced by retreat. Because it will take decades to build enough housing to relocate all of these families, we need an interim strategy to protect the people who live in the South G Street area. We all know the housing market in Arcata is already very challenging, and there is a high proportion of lower income households in the South G Street neighborhood. Because of these factors, there are a series of equity considerations when planning for climate adaptation in this area. How we adapt and retreat needs to take social justice and economic factors into consideration, in addition to the frequency of flooding in the future. The protections we have in place now do a good job of preventing flooding for most of the year. We expect some level of flooding when you live next to a water body, but there is generally a point which flooding goes from being periodic nuisance to having a real impact on the quality of life in an area. We'll talk more about the projections for sea level rise, groundwater, and stormwater flooding in a future video. Right now, I want to focus on how feasible it may be to continue to protect the South G Street neighborhood and to what elevation. I also want to discuss what the dikes and berms may look like and how they might function in this area in the future. This aerial zooms in on the South G Street neighborhood. You can see the Butcher Slough mouth prominently in the bottom of the image. The dike elevations are shown from the primary structures that protect the neighborhood from tidal flooding. And these are the structures we would need to focus on enhancing to continue to provide protection in the future as sea level rises. As it stands today, our area will receive about a foot of sea level rise, regardless of any climate cooling measures humanity may take. To continue the same level of protection with 1 foot of sea level rise, we would need all of these structures to be in light blue 11.6 foot range or higher. Looking at these elevations, the existing dikes and protective structures, I would estimate a third of them will need to be raised to meet this threshold. In this area, the space is limited for traditional, and a more traditional dike or seawall would be the most appropriate solution. These are engineered structures that are armored with riprap and generally do not support any habitat. You can see examples of this type of dike around Clop Lake. The trail on the bayside edge of the lake is actually on top of one of these structures. So that's one kind of dike we might see in the future. But where there is more space, like around these edges and segments, we can be more creative and compatible with Arcata's values around restoring habitat. Along these sections, we could use eco-levees to manage floodwaters. An eco-levee is a structure that functions like a dike or levee that incorporates natural features to prevent erosion and restore habitat. They generally have a much wider profile and a gentler slope than a traditional dike. This example from the San Francisco Bay shows a long slope leading to a gentle transition to a tidal marsh, then to mudflat. This design provides more opportunity to restore habitat and blends better with the environment. In Arcata Bay, on the bay side, eco-levees may incorporate a living shoreline of salt marsh habitat. On the segments where the eco-levee would transition to pasture or freshwater ecosystems, a willow scrub or similar habitat could be used to soften the transition between dike and habitat. Regardless of the type of structure used, the current plan includes new public access to these dikes and levees when they are built. So we would have trails on top of these new dikes and levees. This would expand recreational opportunities in the South G and Marsh neighborhoods. The solutions we choose as a community will need to consider how often we are experiencing flooding, what depth of flooding we are experiencing, the cost to build and maintain the flood structures, and what the environmental impacts are likely to be of creating those structures. But we also need to consider the hundreds of families, workers, and businesses that will be displaced if we do not maintain and enhance the existing flood structures. We live now with periodic flooding. We will continue to live with flooding as sea level rises. There are a lot of unanswered questions about rates of sea level rise, maximum elevation of future sea level, and our ability to address these compounding flooding events. And we'll discuss these in future videos. Thank you for watching part 2 of the series. For more information and to learn about events, go to the city's website at www.cityofarcata.org or search Arcata Sea Level Rise. You can also sign up for the listserv about local coastal program on the city's website to receive information from the city about events. Reach out with any questions or comments. Bye for now.